Hello everybody, this is Albert with Green Tea House. I hope you're doing well today. Today we're going to talk about the generational divide in the Asian world regarding tea. Now before we begin, if you haven't done so already, please stop by and check us out at the tea shop. Please also subscribe and hit the notification bell if you haven't done so already, and post a comment. So what do I mean by the generational divide? Well, you can kind of see it play out in the United States. Let's say for baseball, for example. Baseball was a very popular sport with the older generation, and certainly it was America's pastime for well over 100 years, and the younger generations see it kind of slow. You can certainly see played out in food preferences in the United States as well. There's a generational divide between what, let's say, baby boomers and Gen Xers would consume as opposed to what millennials and Gen Zers would consume as well. Like, you're not going to find a lot of baby boomers eating Takis, but you'll find a lot of younger kids eating Takis or those really spicy chips. So in the Asian world, you see this, and it's even more problematic because tea is a way of life. Think of the chado, that literally means the way of tea. It is steeped in the Japanese culture, and its tea is steeped deep into many of these Asian countries, where it was just generation after generation, not just for decades or even hundreds of years, but for millennia, tea was consumed. And tea was consumed in a certain way, which was normally hot. Now, we've talked about before how infused tea or loose leaf tea infused in hot water is actually a relatively recent occurrence in the history of tea. Really came out about 350 years ago. Before that, tea, depending on what phase you're talking about in China, there was a phase where it was kind of like matcha, where it was lathered up. You kind of see that more in the Sung Dynasty and whatnot. But the idea of drinking warm tea was the way of these cultures. And now what you've seen with the younger generations, it's changed. The younger generations are not, for lack of a better word, turned on to tea as the older generations. And this is causing a problem. It's causing a divide among the generations. You may be asking, what's causing this divide? Well, for lack of a better word, it's the standard American diet. It's the Western diet that has been exported to these countries the last 30 years. As China, as Japan, as Korea, as Vietnam, as India, as Sri Lanka, a lot of these tea producing countries, as they've become more prosperous and they've modernized, think of the Asian tigers. You might have heard that term. That's a term used for South Korea and Hong Kong and Singapore, that these countries were still pretty behind in the 1960s, but by the 1990s they were very modern. As they've modernized and embraced capitalism, they've embraced American foods, tastes, and preferences. So you see fast food going over there. Among other things, you see Starbucks going over there. So the younger generation is gravitating more toward what they perceive to be what's in the zeitgeist in the West. So they're drinking coffee. They're drinking iced coffee. They're drinking bubble teas. They're drinking other things like that are not the traditional teas that their parents, grandparents, and of course ancestors had drunk quite a bit. So you see this effort made by the Chinese government and the Japanese government and other places, Taiwanese government, to make sure that they cling to the heritage, retain the heritage, and try to inculcate into the younger generations the importance of this heritage that they've have been passed down to. And so you see this divide where a lot of the kids see the traditional way to drink tea, hot, as old school, old-fashioned, not hip, not cool, not West. And so you see a lot of them, like, they don't want to associate with anything that's old and West. Now that could change in 20, 30 years when they're middle age, but there is this divide where the younger people are drinking coffee. And if they are drinking tea, you'll see it in the form of bubble tea. You'll see it in the form of maybe iced tea. They'll drink it in plastics, like the PETs. So over in many of these countries, they're going to be drinking tea, let's say in Japan, they're going to be drinking tea that comes bottled in plastic and the polyethylene, and the abbreviation for polyethylene is PET, so they'll call them PET. And the sad thing about this is like in Japan, where they'll have vending machines for cold tea, for example, these teas don't even come from Japan. They're coming from India. They're coming from Vietnam. They're coming from China. They're not even coming from their own culture, their own heritage. And this is why the older generations lament this, is because the younger generations are, we're generalizing to a certain extent, are so caught up with kind of Western values that they're eschewing or shirking off the old traditional values of their family. And you see them drinking these kind of adulterated beverages. Same for matcha lattes. You think about matcha lattes were not really big in Japan 30, 40 years ago. Hojicha lattes were not really big. Now you see these Starbucks-esque, the unicorn frappuccino, these super matcha, syrupy, sugared up adulterations you see in these countries, and they're nothing really connected to their ancestral ways. So we shall see what will happen. But if you ever do go to any of these aforementioned countries, you will see, and there are going to be exceptions, there are going to be kids, Gen Zers or whatever, that are drinking hot tea traditionally, but as a whole, the younger generations are doing what's cool and hip, and they're not drinking the tea the way their parents or grandparents and their ancestors drank. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Have you experienced this? Have you seen this firsthand? Until next time, take care and God bless.